Get out of the car now. Two fake HOA security officers blocked my wife's car under the pretense of a routine check by the lake. Uniforms looked like real police, but the badges were wrong, audios were fake, and the way they surrounded the car screamed ambush. My wife realized this wasn't a routine stop. This was a pre-planned trap. When the first one pulled out zip ties, she had 3 seconds to decide: surrender or fight back. What happened next turned a harmless inspection into a life-or-death battle, exposing the dark conspiracy within our HOA. Comment and tell me how far your HOA has crossed the line. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This nightmare began 3 weeks earlier at what should have been a routine HOA meeting. The Maplewood Estates clubhouse sat like a glass monument beside our community lake, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting water that had drawn families like mine to this upscale ranch development. Tonight, though, the serenity felt manufactured, almost aggressive in its suburban perfection. I watched residents file into the main conference room, their conversations creating nervous energy that would soon explode into something far more dangerous than anyone anticipated. Vivian Thornfield commanded attention the moment she entered, her steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun that announced authority before she spoke a word. At 50, she carried herself like someone accustomed to absolute obedience, her designer blazer and calculated smile masking something predatory underneath. She'd been HOA chairwoman for 2 years, transforming what had once been collaborative community governance into her personal fiefdom. The woman didn't just enforce rules. She manufactured them, pulling obscure regulations from nowhere to justify whatever power play suited her current agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, Thornfield began, her voice slicing through conversations with practiced efficiency. Tonight we're implementing crucial security enhancements for our lake access areas. She gestured toward a PowerPoint slide displaying uniformed figures that looked suspiciously like actual police officers. Our new enhanced patrol program will ensure compliance with community standards through immediate intervention protocols. The corporate doublespeak was deliberate, wrapping authoritarian control in bureaucratic language that sounded official while revealing absolutely nothing concrete about their actual intentions or legal authority. Two strangers flanked Thornfield's position near the presentation screen, their presence feeling ominous in our suburban community setting. One was heavy-set with nervous eyes constantly scanning resident faces, while the other maintained rigid military posture despite civilian clothing. Neither introduced themselves or explained their attendance, but their positioning suggested they weren't random homeowners. They stood with predatory alertness, attention focused on cataloging residents rather than following Thornfield's presentation, as if building intelligence files for future operations. My wife Juliana raised her hand as Thornfield clicked to the next slide. "Excuse me, but this proposal lacks fundamental legal foundation," she said, her attorney training immediately identifying the constitutional violations. California Civil Code Section 1500 establishes clear limitations on HOA enforcement authority. You cannot authorize personnel to conduct vehicle stops or demand compliance checks without explicit statutory backing. Her voice remained professional but firm, cutting through Thornfield's bureaucratic smokescreen. Furthermore, these uniforms deliberately mimic law enforcement, which violates Penal Code Section 538-D regarding impersonation of peace officers. Thornfield's smile never wavered, but something dangerous flickered behind her eyes, a momentary crack revealing genuine malice beneath the composed facade. "Mrs. Cross," she said, Juliana's name dripping with subtle contempt. "I appreciate your interpretation of the law. However, our legal counsel has thoroughly reviewed these protocols." She gestured toward a folder that remained conspicuously unopened throughout the meeting. "These security officers will operate within full compliance of their commissioned authority." The deflection was smooth but hollow, offering zero evidence while using intimidation tactics to silence legitimate questions. The two mystery men exchanged glances, and I caught the heavy-set one photographing Juliana's license plate through the window with his phone. The gesture was quick, practiced, almost invisible unless you were specifically watching for surveillance behavior. My own military background had trained me to notice such operational details, and this particular detail sent alarm bells screaming. Why would legitimate security personnel need photographs of residents' vehicles at a public HOA meeting? The answer felt obvious and deeply threatening. They were already building target files. "I'd like to review commission certificates and insurance documentation for these officers." Juliana continued, refusing to be dismissed by Thornfield's bureaucratic stonewalling. Community members have the right to verify credentials of any enforcement personnel operating in our neighborhood. Several residents nodded agreement, their faces showing first doubts about Thornfield's authoritarian expansion. The woman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and she made angry notes in her personal leather portfolio with sharp strokes that suggested Juliana's questions had struck nerves Thornfield hoped to keep hidden. During the meeting's progression, I noticed security cameras mounted in clubhouse corners had been repositioned from their normal coverage patterns. Instead of monitoring general seating areas, they now focused specifically on sections where vocal residents typically sat. Residents like Juliana, who had previously challenged Thornfield's increasingly dictatorial policies. The adjustment was subtle but deliberate, creating surveillance infrastructure that felt more like intimidation than legitimate security monitoring. Combined with the strangers' intelligence-gathering activities, a pattern of hostile preparation was emerging. The meeting concluded with Thornfield announcing the enhanced patrol program would begin immediately, regardless of resident concerns about legality or necessity. "Security is not negotiable," she declared with finality that crushed further discussion. "Those who have nothing to hide should welcome increased oversight." The statement hung like a veiled threat, its implications crystal clear to anyone understanding the subtext. Compliance was mandatory, and resistance would be documented, analyzed, and presumably punished through whatever means Thornfield deemed appropriate. Walking to our car afterward, Juliana and I felt hostile eyes tracking our movement from clubhouse windows. The sensation wasn't paranoia. It was recognition that asking legitimate questions had somehow transformed us into targets for enhanced attention. Juliana's hands remained steady as she unlocked her door, but I could see her mind already analyzing the evening's events with systematic thoroughness that had served her well in both military service and legal practice. Thornfield had revealed more tonight than intended, and none of it suggested legitimate community governance. The drive home took us past the lake where our real troubles would soon begin, though we couldn't know it then. The water looked black under evening sky, its surface reflecting clubhouse lights like scattered warnings. Within days, this peaceful setting would become the battlefield for a confrontation that would expose Thornfield's true agenda and force our entire community to face the reality of what happens when unchecked authorities meets determined resistance. The enhanced patrol program was about to show its real purpose, and Juliana would be its first target. The harassment began exactly 72 hours after the HOA meeting. Juliana found the first violation notice tucked under our windshield wiper Monday morning, printed on official-looking letterhead that somehow made the absurd accusations feel legitimately threatening. "Vehicle positioning non-compliance," it read, citing a parking angle that supposedly violated subsection 12 of the community guidelines. The notice included precise measurements, 14 degrees off optimal positioning, and a timestamp showing the violation had been recorded at 2:37 a.m. when we'd been asleep for hours. By Wednesday, 2 more citations had appeared with similarly ridiculous charges. One accused us of irrigation timing violations, because our sprinkler system had activated during allegedly restricted hours, despite no such restrictions existing in any HOA documentation we possessed. The other claimed unauthorized lake access for Juliana's morning jog along the community trail that every resident had used freely for years. Each notice bore the signature of someone calling himself Deputy Security Officer, a position that had never existed in our community's organizational structure. Juliana spread the citations across our kitchen table like evidence in a criminal case, her legal mind immediately identifying the pattern of escalating intimidation. "Look at the detail level," she said, pointing to timestamps and measurements that suggested round-the-clock surveillance. "Someone's been documenting our daily routines with systematic thoroughness. This isn't random enforcement, it's targeted harassment designed to establish a paper trail for future action." Her finger traced the signature lines, noting slight variations that suggested multiple people were signing the same fictional title. The notices themselves revealed more than their creators probably intended. Each citation referenced HOA subsections that didn't exist in our actual governing documents, creating a parallel set of rules that only Thornfield's enhanced patrol program seemed authorized to enforce. The letterhead included a logo combining traditional HOA imagery with law enforcement symbols deliberately blurring the line between legitimate community management and pseudo-governmental authority. Most disturbing was the consistency of observation. Whoever was generating these reports had intimate knowledge of our family's daily schedule. Thursday afternoon brought visual confirmation of what the citations had already suggested. A black patrol vehicle began appearing near our house with suspicious regularity, making slow passes that served no obvious security purpose. The driver wore sunglasses and carried what appeared to be official radio equipment, but the vehicle itself bore no legitimate HOA markings or identification numbers. Instead of professional security company branding, it displayed only generic community patrol decals that could have been printed at any office supply store. I started timing these appearances, discovering they occurred precisely when Juliana left for work, returned for lunch, and came home each evening. The surveillance wasn't random or coincidental. Someone had positioned observers to monitor our movements with methodical accuracy. More troubling was the driver's behavior during these encounters, maintaining deliberate eye contact, while taking notes or speaking into his radio, ensuring we knew we were being watched and recorded. Friday morning revealed an escalation that crossed into genuinely threatening territory. Juliana discovered fresh footprints in the soft soil beneath our kitchen window, the tread pattern suggesting professional-grade boots rather than casual athletic shoes worn by neighborhood joggers. The prints were positioned perfectly for someone to observe our breakfast routine and monitor our morning conversations. Whoever had left them had stood there long enough to leave deep impressions, suggesting extended surveillance rather than casual trespassing. The boot prints led to a more disturbing discovery when Juliana decided to inspect our vehicles for additional evidence of tampering. Beneath her sedan's rear bumper, barely visible, unless you knew where to look, someone had attached a small electronic device with magnetic mounting. The GPS tracker was sophisticated enough to provide real-time location data, but crude enough to suggest amateur installation rather than professional law enforcement equipment. Its placement required someone to crawl under the vehicle during nighttime hours, when discovery was unlikely. Juliana photographed everything with methodical thoroughness, building a documentation file that would prove invaluable in the coming confrontation. "This is conspiracy-level harassment," she said, examining the tracker's serial numbers through a magnifying glass. "Professional security companies don't skulk around planting surveillance equipment on residents' cars. This is either criminal stalking or unauthorized intelligence gathering by people pretending to have authority they don't possess." Her military training had taught her to recognize the difference between legitimate oversight and hostile operations. The tracker's discovery prompted a complete security review of our property, revealing additional signs of unauthorized monitoring. Our mailbox showed evidence of tampering with scratches around the lock, suggesting someone had attempted to access our correspondence. The outdoor security camera we'd installed near our front door had been subtly repositioned to point away from the driveway, creating blind spots that hadn't existed before. Saturday brought confirmation that we weren't imagining the escalating surveillance. The same black patrol vehicle appeared 3 separate times during a single afternoon, each pastime to coincide with our outdoor activities. When Juliana worked in our garden, the vehicle slowed to a crawl as its occupant made deliberate notes. When I retrieved mail from our box, the driver raised binoculars to observe from a distance that eliminated any pretense of casual security patrol. The message was unmistakable. We were being studied, cataloged, and prepared for whatever action Thornfield's mysterious security program had planned. The psychological impact was exactly what our harassers intended. Simple activities like checking mail or walking to our car now carried undercurrents of tension that hadn't existed the previous week. Juliana maintained her professional composure, but I could see the stress building as each day brought new evidence of violation and surveillance. Our home no longer felt like a sanctuary, but rather like a fishbowl where hostile observers monitored our every movement for future use against us. Sunday evening brought the final piece of evidence that would soon prove crucial in exposing the entire conspiracy. While reviewing our security camera footage from the week, Juliana discovered something our harassers hadn't anticipated. Our neighbor's motion-activated camera had captured clear images of the GPS tracker's installation, showing 2 figures in dark clothing working beneath our vehicle during the early morning hours of Thursday. The footage was grainy, but sufficient to establish criminal trespassing and potentially identify the perpetrators. As we prepared for another week of escalating harassment, neither of us could have predicted how quickly the situation would explode into open confrontation. Thornfield's enhanced patrol program was about to reveal its true purpose, and the mysterious security officers who had been watching us from the shadows were preparing to step into the light. The evidence we'd carefully documented would soon become the foundation for a legal battle that would expose the criminal conspiracy hiding behind our HOA's authoritarian facade. Friday afternoon stretched before us with deceptive tranquility, the kind of perfect autumn weather that made our lakeside community feel like a postcard advertisement for suburban paradise. Juliana had finished her morning legal consultations and decided to clear her head with a solo run along the community trail that wound around the water's edge. The decision seemed innocent enough at the time, just a routine exercise session to shake off the week's accumulated stress from Thornfield's escalating harassment campaign. The trail itself showcased the natural beauty that had originally drawn families to this exclusive development. Ancient oak trees formed canopies over sections of the route, while open stretches provided views of the lake that reflected the changing sky like polished glass. Juliana had been running this same 3-mile loop for 3 years, but today carried an undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with physical exertion and everything to do with the sensation of being observed by unseen watchers. The ambush location had been chosen with tactical precision that would have impressed military strategists. A narrow section of trail squeezed between the lake and a dense grove of pine trees created a natural bottleneck where escape routes were limited and visibility was reduced. The spot was far enough from the main residential areas to ensure minimal foot traffic during afternoon hours, yet close enough to community facilities that official-looking vehicles wouldn't seem out of place to casual observers. At exactly 3:15 p.m., as Juliana rounded the bend that brought the narrow section into view, she encountered her first clear indication that this wasn't going to be a routine run. 2 men in what appeared to be official security uniforms stood beside a black SUV positioned to block the trail's continuation. Their stance and positioning immediately triggered threat assessment protocols. This wasn't a coincidental encounter, but a deliberately orchestrated interception. The taller of the two stepped forward with practiced authority, his hand resting casually on what appeared to be standard law enforcement equipment attached to his duty belt. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stop for a routine compliance check," he announced, his voice carrying the kind of forced professional politeness that masked underlying aggression. "I'm Colton Reed with HOA Security Services, and this is my partner Mason Drake. We're conducting lake usage permit verification for all trail users today." Juliana's instincts activated immediately, cataloging details that didn't align with legitimate authority. Reed's uniform looked convincing from a distance, but revealed critical inconsistencies upon closer inspection. Badges with generic symbols lacking identification numbers, radio equipment, missing professional mounting configurations, and duty belts carrying zip ties instead of regulation handcuffs. The entire presentation suggested amateur manufacturing rather than professional law enforcement issue, designed to intimidate through appearance rather than demonstrate actual authority. Drake had positioned himself to create a flanking pattern, now controlling potential retreat routes while maintaining the fiction of routine security work. His hyper-alert posture and constant environmental scanning behavior revealed someone preparing for conflict rather than conducting administrative business. The coordination between the 2 men suggested rehearsed planning rather than spontaneous enforcement, confirming that this confrontation had been specifically orchestrated. "Excuse me, but what specific authority do you have to detain residents on community property?" Juliana asked her attorney training, cutting through the intimidation tactics with surgical precision. "I'm not aware of any lake usage permits required for trail access, and I've reviewed all current HOA documentation regarding recreational facility usage." Her voice remained calm and professional, but she'd already begun calculating potential escape routes and defensive positions available in the immediate area. Reed's confident demeanor flickered momentarily, revealing uncertainty beneath the practiced authority. "Ma'am, these are new regulations implemented under the Enhanced Patrol Program that was approved at the recent board meeting," he said, pulling out a clipboard with official-looking forms. "We're required to verify compliance with updated security protocols before allowing continued access to restricted areas." The explanation sounded rehearsed but hollow, lacking the specific legal foundations that would support legitimate enforcement actions. The forms themselves were masterpieces of bureaucratic theater, featuring complex language and multiple signature lines that created an appearance of official documentation while containing no actual legal substance. References to community safety protocols and enhanced monitoring requirements were deliberately vague, designed to intimidate through complexity rather than inform through clarity. Most concerning was a section requiring personal identification information that had no legitimate purpose for simple trail usage verification. "I'm not required to provide personal information for trail usage that's covered under